This is the group we've got with us this morning. So Julie, you're down there in the green quadrant. So we'll be going to you for our empathetic listening reflection at the end of the session. Closely followed by Catherine there. Gareth. Then, as I was saying earlier, James Eads is with us but is on mute, so he's only observing. He won't be able to contribute during the session. He's actually also lost his voice today, so we did come up with a way that he could contribute, but better for him to rest and listen and learn. And then Alex is on, yeah, and just waiting.
Yeah, morning.
Hi, Alex. Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
So I know some of you have met each other previously. Some of you were on the last webinar together, and some of you not. Good way to get to know one another. So I think we'll probably crack on, and as and when Kerry can join and we can bring her up to speed. So if you see me look to my right, that's or your left, that's because Daniel is here to assist me, out of sight, but with much more familiarity with the tech. So he's my sort of right-hand person in this context, keeping me on time and on technical know-how, and also is the host of the session. So he's the one that will be alerted when new people join. And he will be at times during our session today putting you into breakout groups as well. So there's times when we'll break into smaller groups for discussion, then come back together to feedback. So he'll be facilitating that. So our aims for this morning, as I think you know, is to think about CME with regard to feedback. So giving and receiving feedback. And I'm aware that I'm sure you all have different structures that you use in your context or as consultants to help people through this process or this flow of giving feedback. And I will be offering one this morning in case it's helpful, but I absolutely recognise that you may already have one that you love and that you like to work with. So our main question, whilst I will be introducing a framework, is therefore going to be how can CME as a tool kind of enrich that process and our understanding of which elements of any process that we use might be a stretch for people, that might be easier, what might be their natural strengths in terms of giving and receiving feedback, and what might be the potential barriers. And then we'll be moving on to look at the 360 report, which I hope you've all received and had a chance to have a little mull over, and just having a time to discuss together how this could be potentially brought in to a workshop or working with a client alongside sort of giving and receiving feedback, and how this might enrich that process. So that's our process today. So if you could just take a moment, so I don't know if you've all got sort of pen and paper in front of you, to have a little think about a good experience and a bad experience that you have had of receiving feedback. So a good experience you've had of receiving feedback and a bad experience. Just give you 2 minutes to have a think about that. And within that, what was the impact? What was the impact on you? Perhaps what was the impact on others? So some of the things we're going to be doing this morning are obviously activities that if you were leading a workshop on this subject, you would be doing with your delegates. We've only got an hour together. Often workshops would be longer than that. So I'm giving you 2 minutes, but then we're going to have a couple of minutes to share together. But like many of the things we might touch on, of course, you would, if you were in a workshop context, potentially this can, I mean, I know Alex, you've done a workshop around a similar structure. This can take at least half an hour, if not an hour, in my experience, of actually having people reflect on their own experience of giving and receiving feedback and then share that with one another. I would certainly schedule in a group at least half an hour for this. That's helpful. So starting with reflecting on our own experience. 1 or 2 people would like to share with the group. Perhaps one person share a good experience and then another a bad experience.
I don't mind doing a good experience.
Mhm.
It was when I was an events director, so I had a team underneath me. I'd had a 360, and I was given an appraisal by someone I massively respected. I thought very highly of him, and the appraisal was quite hard hitting, but it was written down. And because one, it was from someone I respected, and two, it was written down, I couldn't argue with it. So I had to find a way of dealing with it and working out how I was going to get through. So that was a conversation that my colleague helped me through. So yeah, and the impact was, I remember some of the hard hitting comments from that appraisal to this day.
Mm.
And I can, start to dial it down a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex, and thanks for sharing that and the specifics of what made it helpful for you. Anyone got a less positive experience they'd like to share and the impact that had?
I had a one. It was an HR director. She was very, very blue, very cold and analytical, not a people person at all. And it was a character assassination more than anything else. It was really, really hard. Some of the things that she was giving as evidence weren't true. So it was crushing. It was difficult to come back from. And in fact, I left the company. But it was horrible. It raised stress levels. It was just awful, awful.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that, Julian. And it would be interesting maybe to reflect on sort of how any content that could have been good in that might have been shared in a more helpful way, if that would have been possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so again, of course, we could all go around and share the good and the bad and think about what was it that made it negative in terms of the way that it was done and the structure or lack thereof, and what was it that made it positive. We're going to break now into little groups to think about the connection with your colour preference. So looking at those examples that you've written, your good experience and your bad experience, and perhaps if you're able to, thinking about the possible colour combination, as Julie just did, of those who were sharing the feedback with you, or your guess at their perhaps lead colour combination. What impact did your own colour combination, perhaps theirs, have on that experience? So we're going to break you into groups to discuss that with your partner now. And James, we'll put you in the group and you're just able to listen to people's reflections. Here are your C's to help your partner's C's on the screen, so you can have a little look at the colour combination. Daniel's just putting you into groups now, and the system will prompt you when to come back to the main group. Okay.
Just so you can wind up the conversation. So we'll do it in a second.
Hi, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. I hope those were useful discussions. Just waiting for 2 more people to stop their conversations, I believe. Yep, all in. Great, I believe you're all back. Hope those conversations were useful. So it would be great now, having reflected on those positive and negative experiences through the lens of colour, if we could have 2 more experiences shared. Catherine, I'm going to pick on you as someone who's visual I can see and didn't contribute before. Would you like to share either your positive or your negative example with your colour reflections?
Yeah, so so I'll share my negative just because the colour preference was very clear. So it was someone who has yellow colour preference, and it was done very on the hoof, and I didn't feel like it had been well thought through, and not backed up with evidence, nor was I given a chance to respond. And the conversation was interrupted because it hadn't been scheduled. It was interrupted, and the person giving me feedback never followed up, so it's been left hanging. And I think for me, obviously I have yellow preference, but actually with my blue and green preferences, I prefer things written down so that I can reflect in my own time, and I need to be able to I need to see evidence to back it up, and actually be able to argue my point where I don't agree with what is being said, and I wasn't given that opportunity.
And do you think having that awareness of colour, or perhaps your profiles to hand, might have given a different sort of lens to that feedback conversation?
Definitely, yeah.
In what sort of way?
I think the person in question has now done their colour preferences, so I could follow up and say, have a conversation in terms of kind of just saying, I value the feedback, but actually I would value it written down so that I can go away and reflect and action the stuff. But also I would value an opportunity to come back to you having reflected with my thoughts on it.
Great. So I'm sure as many of you are aware, there's a lot of kind of research and conversation about how important the role of the feedback receiver is in positive feedback experiences. And actually, I think our colour combination gives us quite a neutral lens to own our own preferences in that. So how we are experiencing and receiving the feedback becomes less you've done it well or you've done it badly, to, as you're saying, Catherine, with your preferences, this is how it's going to work best for you, and how you can best take hold of that and move forward with it. So I think our hope is that one of the ways that colour can enrich this process is by giving you a language to say, for me, with my preferences, this is the way that suits me best. So it helps us to take ownership of the process, if you like, insofar as helping us to hear, as well as therefore obviously the content and the actions that might come from that. Thank you, Catherine. Gareth, I wonder if you'd be happy to maybe share your positive experience and the impact that colour might have had on that retrospectively.
Yeah, I think, for me, I suppose I'm yellow, so the positive feedback experience for me is all about the person, and it's about the relationship. So, I've taken some incredibly tough feedback from my boss, who's pretty red and pretty blue. So it tends to be very straight, very direct, very clear, very explicit, often evidence-based. And in some ways, I don't really like feedback in that way. But it works because I've got deep relationship with the lady that gives me the feedback. So I guess the impact for me then is because I know that it's coming from a place that is really positive and really good, and where the person cares about me and values me, then I can take, however critical the feedback is, however tough it is, it's easier for me to take because I know it's coming from a good place. And I think that there is an element of that being a consequence of having this very sort of dominant yellow. I guess in the way I receive feedback. So for me, it's about relationship. You know, the times when feedback's been a poor experience, it's been about the stuff more than the relationship, if that makes sense. I don't know if I've explained that very well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So knowing the person has a supportive intent, essentially.
Yes, absolutely.
And that strong relationship being in place helps you to filter. Perhaps it seems to me the style that might be less your own preference in some way. If it's filtered through that lens, you're more able to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Any other reflections from your subgroups that you feel would be particularly helpful to share with the whole group? No? Okay. Well, we'll move on. So I'm just going to quickly introduce a structure that we use when we're working with group in terms of feedback. And as I said earlier, I'm sure you've got your own, but this is one that we find helpful. And it does sort of hit the different colours as well, potentially, in terms of emphases. So Gareth, actually, you've set it up very well for us because the first point is support. So we're using the acronym of SAID.
Great.
Hopefully something that's memorable in terms of feedback generally being something that is said, although as we've heard, it's very important, particularly for some people, to have it written down. So starting with support, having a clear intention to help the person succeed, just as Gareth has really helpfully expressed, knowing that the reason, the motivation that the person has for sharing this feedback is to help you succeed. It's a supportive intent, or another way this is phrased is positive regard, knowing the person has positive regard, or for those of you who use psycho-experiential development in that sort of adult to adult place of starting, so supportive intent. Then moving on to the action. So in some ways that supportive intent is, you could phrase that as the why. Why is this happening? And the action then can be seen as the what. So why are we having the conversation? Why is this happening? Because I want to support you. I want you to help you to grow. And then what? What is it I'm talking to you about? What is it that's happened potentially? What is it that you did, said, or that I observed in terms of impact on someone else? So here, the specificity is key. That this isn't an abstract generalization. This is really specific, observable behavior. And as you all know, CME is a behavioural tool. So when we're pulling in CME around a feedback conversation, it is going to be about behaviour, not the person's character per se, but the behaviour that we have seen that we want to reflect on with that person in order to help them succeed. And then thirdly, impact. So what impact? This is often, if you want to carry on the sort of why, what, I would say this is the who, because usually it's impact it had on somebody. This might be on you yourself. It might well be on others in your team. So what impact did this have? And what was the outcome of that impact? So if it was an impact on that team member, what impact did that have on perhaps the project you're working on, or the culture, the atmosphere, those sorts of things. So supportive intent, the why are you having this conversation? Action, what was it you saw or you want to reflect on? And then impact, why is this important? What impact did it have? Or the who, if you like. And then lastly, what is it you want them to do differently? So how do you want them to behave in the future? What does good look like is another way of looking at this. So as you can see here, and obviously these slides will be circulated to you afterwards, just to flag that, so you don't need to worry about writing all of this down. But this is about being clear about what behaviour you would like them to demonstrate in the future. So if we're going to rewind and replay that situation that you're reflecting on with them, what would good look like? And playing that right through. So if you've covered off the negative impact this might have had, what would the positive impact perhaps have been if that had gone differently? So said, that's the structure that we use. So coming back then to colour, we're going to put you back in your groups to reflect on that together and think about which of those elements might resonate more with each of our colours. So we've had some helpful thoughts on that actually in the examples that you've shared already. But if you're perhaps now imagining giving feedback to someone, you know their colour combination, you're preparing an example to discuss with them, where might your emphasis need to be depending on their colour combination? Or bearing in mind, of course, that flexing to our opposite is often hardest. What might be the hardest work for you in terms of those elements and the flex that you might need to engage when you're talking that through with them? We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, we're in groups.
Great. You put them back in the same groups.
Yeah. So you're much faster than. You had 10 minutes for that, and you did about 4.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting for me to know. Welcome back, Julie and Alex.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello. Is that everybody, Daniel? Yeah, great. So it'd be lovely to hear some of your reflections shared with the other group, some of the highlights, if you like. So perhaps let's go through each of the elements there. So support. For which colours did we feel this would be most important?
Green, definitely. They want to know that they're feeling supported. Yellow is very relational based, but I don't think they need too much at the time of giving. But I think green is probably the key support one.
Yeah.
We talked about even just, you'd sit next to them and give the feedback, whereas the reds you could sit opposite them because they like to see the whites of your eyes. But the greens it's next to, it's soft, it's making sure they understand you're supporting them.
Great. So thinking about the physical environment as well. So in a way, the S could also there be standing for safety, I think, couldn't it? That person
I like it.
That they're in a safe space, including your body language, tone of voice, and your supportive intent in meeting with them.
Can I just add something in there about so yellow? I wonder whether yellow preference, because they're still feeling based, and actually for yellow preference, how other people see them is really important. So actually, they do need to feel supported, because if you're then going to feed back something that potentially impacts the way that others view them, that is something that's important to yellow preference people.
Great. So again, that relational base, but from a slightly different lens, and almost sort of being ready for what's next. Yeah. Thank you, Catherine. Any other observations on that positive regard baseline? Okay, moving forward, action. For whom is this going to be particularly either important or difficult in terms of thinking of ourselves as the feedback givers?
Someone with a high level of blue very much wants evidence base, don't they? They want an evidence base. They want to know exactly what it is, and they want an evidence base for it.
Absolutely.
So we Alex and I are having a really interesting conversation, because as someone who's predominantly yellow, that's the bit of feedback I would find the hardest. So when you start thinking about both giving and receiving feedback, actually it's really interesting to start thinking about how the giver and the recipient both interpret things and see things in a very different fashion.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting.
And I've had an experience actually of giving feedback. There was a story when I ran a feedback session from a really, really deep blue. And he said when he did, he was doing a postgraduate master's type thing, PhD. So the detail was huge. And he said he got back a load of feedback from his professor, and it absolutely pulled his PhD apart. And he said, I took absolutely every word because of the stature, the kind of the letters after his name and his position in the business. He said, that was fine. Feedback from him was absolutely fine. From anybody else, found it really hard.
That's interesting.
So something there about the authority of the person giving the feedback to do so. Yeah. But for him, it sounds like the fact it was very specific,
really
made
specific.
it perceivable.
Yeah.
Great. So so for someone with a lot of blue preference, absolutely vital that this is rooted in fact, a factual observation. So if it's an event, if it's something you're describing, when did it happen? Something like getting the date wrong. Oh, last Tuesday you said, no, it was Wednesday. That's going to utterly undermine the whole rest of the conversation. So being clear on when did this happen? What exactly was it? With whom? And again, actually flipping to do differently, the level of detail there, the granularity about what exactly do you mean? What would good look like? Not wishy-washy vague, but really specifically, demonstrably different. So I'm sure with this PhD example, Alex, the level of detail around what needed to be there potentially would have been really, really granular. And Gareth, I think I was hearing from you there that thinking, as we should be as well, about being givers of feedback, you with high yellow preference, this might be an area of sort of stretch, having that specificity, being really focused in what it was, when it was.
Absolutely.
All of those sorts of things. Because
if I'd been on the end of that PhD feedback, I'd have just, it just driven me nuts. It would just drive me nuts, because I'm not interested in the detail. I'm interested in the big picture and broad strokes. So the minutiae of detail would drive me insane. What that means is when I've got 2 people who are very high blue in my team, and my feedback is not specific enough, and it's not evidence-based enough, and that's probably one of the reasons why they struggle with it. So it's really interesting, really interesting.
Great, thank you. So moving on to impact, who do we have in mind when we're thinking about impact particularly?
That would be yellow people. They're more about how do they feel, how's it made others feel. So it'd be more about the feelings.
And Julie, that remind me of what Catherine said in terms of yellows are really concerned about how they're perceived.
Yeah.
So the impact they've made on others. If they realise that they've made a negative impact, they'll be absolutely devastated.
Yeah.
And what about red in this space? Where's red? If someone has a strong red preference, what's going to be really important to them, do you think, or resonate with them, thinking about these different areas?
I mean, I think in terms of impact, it's kind of, has it had an effect on the desired goals and results, you know, kind of looking at it from that lens rather than the people lens.
Absolutely. Yeah. So impact on project outcomes.
Yeah.
I think there's an element with reds of the A and the D. What did I do? What do you want me to do differently? Don't need to talk about it for hours. Just tell me what I did. Tell me what you want me to do differently. It's simple, quick, straight, right between the eyes.
Depending on their colour combination.
Yeah.
Bit of supportive intent and team impact for those who have yellow preference as well, I think, or green. Yeah. I'm sure with your boss, Gareth, you were talking about red, blue, and so that task focus, as you were saying, that really rooted in the facts of the matter and the overall impact on outcomes, going to be really key. Yeah.
In terms of receiving feedback with your colour combinations, I was saying to Julie, I know I have to be very aware that my initial response, because of my yellow-green combination, is to take feedback very personally. And being aware of that, and allowing myself to feel that way, but not to act on it, is really important, which I think is why, you know, like for me, I was saying having it written down so I don't have to respond immediately to the person allows me to process that part of how I receive feedback. So I think just being aware of that in this structure with people with strong feeling preference is important.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's almost a form of, if you like, unconscious bias, our own unconscious bias around how we're hearing. So often people, for example, with a sort of strong red preference or red blue, the sort of sense of justice or injustice perhaps might be really strong as a knee-jerk reaction, particularly if they feel like the facts are off. So yeah, managing that, taking time, knowing our strategies that we need to have ourselves actually around hearing and receiving feedback. Because the best way to help this happen is to model it.
So one thing I find with Gareth and I were talking about it is when you've got someone who's quite it kind of fits on the extroversion lens, is that sometimes if they don't emotionally connect with the feedback they're giving, it doesn't go in. It just goes over their head.
Yeah.
And sometimes reds and yellows can often do that if they're quite high in the extroversion. Whereas in the very, very low introversion, whether it's blue or green, but low introversion, we talk about supersizing the feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and being aware of that, again, sort of bias, if you like, towards which people are likely to, as you say, supersize this and which people are likely to brush it off, helps us to set our tone and to engage. And particularly on the impact, I would say, coming to the why are we having this conversation? Yes, it's to help you succeed, but from a team lens, why is this important? I think for both of those biases can be really helpful, either to put it in perspective, that this is a team issue, or in fact to sort of answer the question, well, why should I care? That this is affecting our outcomes or the other members of the team or whatever that might be. Great. So in a workshop, what I would be doing now is moving people into practicing this. So they've got structure, they've had a little think about how colour impacts this, they've had a little think about what good looks like, what bad looks like, their own experience of that. and we would be moving into practicing. There's different ways you can do that. It might be that you ask people to rerun one of their own experiences. So let's say they've had a negative experience of feedback. You might want to, if they're able, if it's appropriate, to ask them to have a go at giving that feedback in a way that would have been positive, hearable, etc., bearing in mind the colour combination, bearing in mind the structure. People might want to practice a real example that they have with a partner. Ideally, actually, in this situation, I would say you pair people with opposites, so they can also be practicing flexing. So someone with high red is practicing, as you said, Alex, that's sort of getting alongside someone, moderating tone, moderating body language, really helping them feeling safe and supported at the beginning. So we haven't got much time to do this now. Again, this is an activity that would take a long time, but we're going to just really quickly have a go at that in our pairs. So as a suggestion, if you're able to think of an example of feedback you would like to give to someone. This could be a current situation, this feedback you'd like to give. It can be historic. And so you are going to, with your partner, if you tell your partner kind of what the headline colour is perhaps for this individual, so that can help them be receiving the feedback, listening with that ear, if you like, and then have a quick go at giving that feedback, bearing in mind the headline colour and using this structure. I'm afraid we're not going to have much time to do this, so we'll just, if you could just have a fairly quick go and then swap, so just a couple of minutes each, and then we'll come back together. Thanks.
15 seconds and then we'll be closed.
Okay. Great. I'm sorry that was such a rush, everybody. As I say, I would generally allow at least 20 minutes for that activity in a workshop, but gives you a little taste of it. And as I say, yeah, pairing people in opposites can be really, really helpful. I've had some real light bulb moments in workshops from that, where people have been amazed at how their partner receives feedback, or their feedback needs essentially are so different from their own. One thing I do say to people if they're doing it with someone with opposite colours is if you have a shared colour in your top two, maybe start there. So let's say one person, you know, you've got blue and yellow, but they both share a lot of red. Actually, you have a shared desire to see those sort of action, the goal achieved. So you can start by almost what you agree on and then lean into the opposite colours from there. Great, so we've got 10 minutes left, time is flying, and I want to give space to think about the 360 report and how this can be pulled in. So hopefully you've all received your 360 reports and had a chance to have a look at them. Before we go on to think about how this could enrich a feedback workshop, any kind of questions or observations on the report?
I mean, the first thing, which I think I know is probably natural, is the first thing is like, what, who said what? Because by understanding who said what, I can probably do things differently in the right scenarios, because the three people were from they're associates, so I work with them, all three of them, very differently. And I'm sitting there, the first thing I did, I read it and thought, oh, that's interesting, and then I went, right, who said what? And I spent probably 20 minutes trying to work out who said what.
So the system can either be anonymous or non-anonymous. We've got both options.
Okay.
And I personally think there's always higher value if it's not anonymous. People feel more uncomfortable filling it in, but as the feedback receiver, yeah, I completely agree with you, Alex. I think it's so helpful to know who said what. So if you're advising a client on this and you're you're 8 and they're not sure and they feel that people would be happy to go either way, absolutely. And I've been in a workshop where people have decided for it to be anonymous, and then halfway through the workshop changed their mind and said, oh, this would be so much more helpful if it was named. And actually we can regenerate it with names on.
Okay.
So that you know that, and that situation I was able to do that because luckily it was at our base, so I was able to go and have that done during the workshop. But if you have their permission, Alex, we'd be able to regenerate it non-anonymously, but obviously you need their permission for that. Any other sort of observations on the report itself?
I think it's really great to be able to see, you know, how you flex in different environments. So my 3 feedback providers were from very different, so one of them was my husband. And so but it's just really interesting to see how you're perceived in different environments. So I had one friend, one, you know, my husband, and then a work one, just to and to see that, you know, that there are commonalities, but then there are shifts, and that was interesting.
Great. And how do you think you would use this if you'd been through the sort of introducing a structure, thinking about colour flex, thinking about what different people's feedback needs might be with regard to their colour combination? How might you pull in 360, do you think, into a workshop context? Or what benefit might it bring?
You can certainly get a feel of how you receive feedback from it. How did it make you feel? What did you do with the information? What are you going to do differently? You could use the SAID model and ask them what their next step, like the action planning from after is quite a good next step. I liked looking at the graphs and the differences and actually realizing, I think Catherine, as you said, is having that flex in different situations to understand, actually, gosh, I am more of this than I thought. How do I either dial that down or is that needed in that situation? And I would have a lot. I would, in a workshop, pull out a lot of conversations, and it's very good for coaching
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we find is just, Catherine, like you were saying, that actually expressing your own feedback needs in terms of your colour combination helps the onus to be on you, if you like, rather than the person to feel criticised in how they were giving feedback. I think my experience is this report does exactly that with the colour intro. Rather than saying something is good or bad, it simply helps us to look at that different perceptions, different flexing in behaviour. So for me, I would often start with this visual, which aggregates the feedback. Then in the middle, you have the person's colour combination. Around the outside, you have the aggregate of their feedback providers. And start with the headline around what is the most significant difference here. So in this individual, you can see that their natural green is quite low. This is their colour combination.
I can't see that, Sonia. I'm still on the have a go. Think of something you need.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, never mind. Well, I'm looking at the inner pie and the outer pie there.
Okay.
And the example I was showing, the inner pie had very little green, but the outer pie had quite a lot of green. So that person essentially is being perceived as having far more green preference than they naturally do. And actually, you could see that flowing through into the narrative answers around actions and activity. So it can help set the frame, if you like, for why people might be making the observations that they're making. So in terms about thinking about strengths and weaknesses or resilience around each colour, it can just frame the whole conversation in a way that I think helps achieve that aim of people feeling in a sort of safe context and feeling supported, because it's neither good or bad, but it is setting a frame. Any other reflections on how we might involve that 360 report in a feedback workshop, or indeed one-to-one feedback conversations? You might want to imagine that you're giving someone, you want to give someone feedback and you've actually asked them to do this 360 as part of the process.
The written at the stuff at the bottom about the continue doing elements, that was just really simply said.
Yeah. And I think again, in terms of process advice here from our team, it would be that simple is good, because there's so much there actually in the colour elements that when you come to the questions, although you can have, and we have had clients that have had 20 and different ways, actually keeping it really simple, because you can tailor those questions to be anything you want them to be, but just keeping it simple often increases the impact.
So if you were doing it with a company, you could add some further questions, or just change those questions that you've got? Yeah.
And I would say usually people do. They want to tailor it to what they're trying to achieve, or perhaps their values, company values, or behavioural framework. They might want to pick the 3 most important elements of the desired behavioural framework for that season. We've done it during a change process for those questions, instead being, how does Alex manage change well? What might she need to do differently in a change journey? So you can frame it as you like, but I would say that keeping it simple adds a lot of benefit. And then, of course, if this was a workshop, it's always good to end with an action plan. And I will, though we won't have time to do it together, suggest that you, with those narrative elements at the back, that you do pick one of them and make an action plan from it. So hopefully there is something there that you can take hold of and reflect further on, and actually work through that said structure and think, what will you be able to do differently as a result? And the colour reflections as well, hopefully, might be helpful in terms of being perceived differently. And the link, I think it's quite good to join up the difference perhaps in colour, how you're perceived and your own preferences, and then the narrative observations. There's often a connection there. If people see less red, then they may be also saying perhaps take more action, or so on. Great, so that's really quick. I just wanted you guys to have a taste of the tool, essentially, and have a think about how you could weave that in, because it's so helpful in those one-to-one feedback conversations at setting the tone something that you can obviously introduce to your clients if they are interested in giving and receiving feedback. If they are interested in this area, then they're likely to be interested in using a 360. It's also something we commonly use within coaching conversations. So I think all of you are coaches and have those conversations with people. So this might be something you want to consider also to enrich your coaching conversations or appraisals. Great, so that we are 2 minutes to go. Questions? It's been a real sort of speed through thinking about feedback in 360. Any observations, any questions in our last couple of minutes together?
Quite a blue question here, Sonia. How much is the 360?
Good question. I think price to client, it slightly depends on sector. Obviously, so as you all know, I think we've got 3 prices: profit, not for profit, and then those of you who act as resellers. I think corporate price to client is 199, 195. Daniel's looking it up for me. 195. I think not for profit and reseller discounts 149 or 149, something like that. Yeah.
And cost to us?
Yeah, it's 149.
Oh, cost to us.
Yeah, I think so. We can verify that for you, Alex. Essentially, it is it's more than a normal report because it's essentially 8 reports. So you've got 8 inputs dialed into one. So it's quite a time-consuming process to gather that in some ways. If you've got a dashboard, there are ways you can do that yourself, and there are bulk prices on that as well. But yeah, the prices essentially range between 150 195, and then go down with bulk. So I think if it's over 10, it goes down. You're doing more than 10, but we can send those through to you. But it's very rich. I mean, I would say most generally it's been done, maybe people have ordered 10 for a senior team, and it's been something that's then been mined quite deeply, both in a workshop situation, but also in follow-up one-to-one coaching and conversation. Any other questions? And I'll wrap it in a moment, but if you want to stay on the line and continue to answer questions, I'm gonna be on the line another sort of 5 minutes or so. So if you feel free to leave at any time from now, and thank you for joining us and for your participation. Hopefully it's been helpful, and we're pinging the slides round. But if you do have questions, then I'll be on for another 5 minutes. So bye to those of you that are leaving, and any questions for those of you that are staying.
Thanks very much indeed, Sonia. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gareth.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Anyone? Any other observations or questions as we finish? No? Okay, well, great. Thank you, everybody, for your engagement. I hope that's been helpful, and we'll see you on the next one for those of you that are joining us.
Thanks, Sonia.
Thank you, Sonia.
Bye.